He was the biggest investor the airline had ever seen, but he was wearing a $50 hoodie and worn-out sneakers. When Desmond Cole sat down in seat 1A, he didn't expect a red carpet, but he certainly didn't expect to be treated like a criminal. Watch closely as a haughty flight attendant and an arrogant pilot make the worst mistake of their careers. They thought they could humiliate him and kick him off the plane for disturbing the peace. They didn't know that with one phone call, Desmond could ground the entire fleet. This is the story of how prejudice met a brutal, instant payday. You do not want to miss their faces when the owner of the airline picks up the phone. The early morning fog at Heathrow Airport was thick, clinging to the tarmac like a wet blanket. But inside the first-class cabin of Flight 882, bound for New York, the air was crisp, scented with expensive leather and the faint, citrusy aroma of fresh linen. Desmond Cole adjusted the strap of his canvas duffel bag as he stepped through the heavy curtains separating business class from the exclusive first-class suites. He was tired. It had been a grueling 72-hour negotiation in London, a deal that had required every ounce of his mental energy to save a failing tech conglomerate from total collapse. He wasn't thinking about his net worth, which sat comfortably in the 9 figures. He wasn't thinking about the brand-new Gulfstream G650 he had on order, which was currently delayed due to supply chain issues. He was thinking about sleep. He glanced at his boarding pass. 1A. He moved toward the suite, his movements slow and deliberate. Desmond was a tall man, with broad shoulders and dark, compassionate eyes that had seen more of the world's harshness than anyone in this cabin could imagine. Today, however, he looked less like a financial titan and more like a graduate student running on caffeine. He wore a charcoal grey hoodie that had seen better days, comfortable joggers, and a pair of white sneakers that were scuffed at the toes. As he reached for the overhead bin to stow his duffel, a sharp, manicured hand shot out, blocking his path. "Excuse me, sir." A voice clipped, dripping with icy condescension. Desmond paused and looked down. Standing there was the head flight attendant. Her name tag read Lydia. She was immaculate in her uniform, her blonde hair pulled back into a bun so tight it looked painful, her red lipstick applied with surgical precision. But her eyes were hard, scanning Desmond's attire with open disdain. "Economy boarding is through the second door, past the galley," Lydia said, pointing a finger back the way he had come. She didn't ask to see his ticket. She stated it as a fact, her voice loud enough that the other 2 passengers already seated, an elderly woman in pearls and a middle-aged man in a bespoke suit, looked up with interest. Desmond smiled, a tired but polite expression. "I know. I'm in 1A." He moved to lift his bag again, but Lydia actually stepped into his personal space, her hand firmly placed on the overhead latch. "Sir, I need you to check your boarding pass again. This is first class. There are no upgrades today, and the cabin is full." "I didn't ask for an upgrade," Desmond said, his voice deep and calm. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the boarding pass, holding it up for her to see. "Desmond Cole, seat 1A." Lydia snatched the paper from his hand, her eyes darting over it as if searching for a forgery. She frowned, the lines around her mouth deepening. She flipped it over, then looked back at the manifest on her tablet. "There must be a system error," she muttered, more to herself than him. She handed the pass back with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated. "Fine, you can take your seat. But please try to get that bag stowed quickly. We have priority passengers boarding momentarily, and we can't have the aisle blocked." "Understood," Desmond said. He easily hoisted the bag into the bin and sat down. As he settled into the plush leather seat, he let out a long exhale. He closed his eyes, hoping to catch a few minutes of rest before takeoff. but peace was not on the menu. "Unbelievable," a voice sneered from across the aisle. Desmond opened one eye. The man in the bespoke suit, seated in 1F, was shaking his head. He was a man Desmond recognized vaguely, Arthur Harrington, a real estate developer known more for his lawsuits than his buildings. Harrington was sipping a glass of pre-flight champagne, staring at Desmond with a look of pure disgust. "They really are letting anyone in here these days," Harrington said loudly to Lydia, who was passing by with a bottle of Dom Perignon. "I thought this airline prided itself on exclusivity. It feels like a Greyhound bus in here." Lydia paused, offering Harrington a conspiratorial, apologetic smile. "I apologize, Mr. Harrington. We do our best, but sometimes the booking algorithms make questionable choices. Let me top that off for you." She poured him more champagne, her demeanor shifting from ice queen to subservient charm in a split second. She then moved to the elderly woman in 2A, offering her a hot towel and a glass. Desmond waited. He was thirsty. His throat felt like sandpaper. He waited for Lydia to turn to him. She walked right past his suite, eyes fixed firmly on the galley curtain ahead. Desmond cleared his throat. "Excuse me, miss?" Lydia stopped, her back stiffening. She turned slowly, her expression flat. "Yes?" "Could I get a water, please? Maybe a glass of champagne, if it's open?" Lydia checked her watch, making a show of being incredibly busy. "We are preparing for departure, sir. I have a lot of pre-flight checks to complete. I'll see what I can do once we are in the air." "You just poured him a glass," Desmond pointed out gently, gesturing to Harrington. "Mr. Harrington is a Diamond Medallion member," Lydia snapped, her voice raising an octave, "and he requested his beverage before the rush. Please sit back and fasten your seatbelt. You're delaying my workflow." She whipped the curtain shut, disappearing into the galley. Desmond sat in silence, the sting of the humiliation settling in. It wasn't the lack of a drink that bothered him. He could buy the champagne factory if he wanted to. It was the principle. It was the assumption that he didn't belong, based solely on a hoodie and the color of his skin. He pulled out his phone. He had a text message from an old friend. "Hope you made the flight, Des. We need to sign those papers by Tuesday." "Richard," Desmond typed back, "I'm on board, but I might need a favor." He didn't hit send yet. He wanted to see how far this would go. He wanted to see if they would correct themselves, or if they would dig their own graves. 20 minutes passed. The plane hadn't moved. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Harrison speaking. We have a slight delay due to some paperwork regarding cargo weight. We should be pushing back in about 15 minutes. Sit tight." The cabin groaned. In first class, delays were usually mitigated by service. Lydia and her junior colleague, a nervous-looking young man named Todd, reappeared with a tray of warm nuts and refreshed drinks. Todd moved toward Desmond, a glass of water in hand. He looked apologetic. "Here you go, sir. I'm sorry about the wait." "Todd!" Lydia's voice was like a whip crack. "I need you in the galley. The coffee machine is acting up again. Leave that." "But Lydia, he hasn't had—" "Now, Todd." Todd gave Desmond a helpless look, set the water down quickly on the edge of the console, and scurried away. Desmond took a sip of the water. It was lukewarm, but it was something. He pulled his laptop out. If they were delayed, he might as well work. He opened a spreadsheet detailing the acquisition of Aeroglobal, the parent company of the very airline he was currently flying. Suddenly, his seat jerked violently. "Hey!" Desmond looked up. Harrington, across the aisle, had kicked the side of Desmond's suite partition. "Can you turn that screen brightness down?" Harrington barked. "I'm trying to nap. It's blinding." The cabin lights were on full brightness. The sun was streaming through the windows. Desmond's screen was barely noticeable. "The shades are open, sir," Desmond said, keeping his voice level. "My screen isn't affecting you. Don't get smart with me, boy," Harrington spat, his face flushing red. "You shouldn't even be in here. Probably used stolen miles or some employee pass. Have some respect for the people who actually paid full fare." Desmond slowly closed his laptop. The air in the cabin shifted. The elderly woman in 2A lowered her magazine, watching with wide eyes. "I paid for my ticket," Desmond said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low rumble. "Just like you. Now, I suggest you keep your feet off my seat and mind your business." Harrington scoffed, pressing the call button repeatedly. Ding! 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 Lydia appeared instantly, looking flustered. "Is everything all right, Mr. Harrington?" "This man," Harrington pointed a shaking finger at Desmond, "is being aggressive. He's threatening me. I don't feel safe flying with him." Lydia turned on Desmond, her eyes flashing with triumph. She had been waiting for this. A reason. "Sir," she said, marching into Desmond's suite area, "I have already warned you about your behavior." "You haven't warned me about anything," Desmond said, stunned. "And I haven't done anything." He kicked my seat. "I saw nothing of the sort," Lydia lied smoothly. "But I do hear you raising your voice. This is a premium cabin. We have standards of conduct. If you cannot behave like a civilized human being, I will have you removed." "I am working on my laptop," Desmond said, standing up. He towered over her, though he kept his hands visible and non-threatening. "This man is harassing me, and you are enabling him." "Sit down!" Lydia shrieked, stepping back as if he had swung at her. "He's standing up! Todd, call the cockpit! He's becoming violent." "I am not violent," Desmond said, looking around the cabin for a witness. "Did anyone see this?" The elderly woman looked down at her lap, terrified to get involved. Harrington smirked, taking another sip of his champagne. "Sit down, or we are calling the police," Lydia yelled. At that moment, the cockpit door opened. Captain Harrison stepped out. He was a large man, ex-military by the look of him, with a buzz cut and a jawline that looked like it was chiseled from granite. He adjusted his hat, his eyes scanning the scene before locking on to Desmond. "What is the problem here, Lydia?" Harrison asked, his voice booming. "It's him, Captain," Lydia said, pointing a trembling finger at Desmond. She was putting on an Oscar-worthy performance of a distressed damsel. "He's been abusive since he boarded. He refused to follow instructions. He's been harassing Mr. Harrington, and now he's standing up aggressively while the seatbelt sign is on." Captain Harrison stepped forward, entering Desmond's personal space. The captain was tall, but Desmond was taller. "Is that true?" Harrison asked, his tone leaving no room for debate. He wasn't asking, he was accusing. "No," Desmond said firmly. "It is a complete fabrication. Check the cabin cameras if you have them, or ask the other flight attendant." "I don't need to check cameras to see a disruption," Harrison growled. "I see a man in a hoodie, upsetting my best customers and my crew. Now, you have two choices. You can sit down, shut your mouth, and not say a single word for the next 7 hours. Or, you can grab your bag and get off my plane." Desmond looked at Harrison. He saw the arrogance, the absolute certainty that he held all the power. Harrison thought he was dealing with an unruly thug. He had no idea he was looking at the man who had just negotiated the refinancing of the airline's debt. Desmond let out a short, dry laugh. It echoed in the tense silence of the cabin. "Something funny?" Harrison snapped. "Yeah," Desmond said. "It is. You're giving me an ultimatum." "I am." "Okay," Desmond said. He reached into his pocket. "Hands where I can see them," Harrison shouted, flinching. Desmond pulled out his phone slowly. He unlocked it. I'm not getting off this plane, Captain, and I'm not sitting down and shutting up. I'm going to make a phone call." "You can't use phones during active taxi preparation," Lydia interjected. "We aren't moving," Desmond said, "and trust me, you want me to make this call." "If you make a call, I'm calling airport security," Harrison threatened, his hand moving to the radio on his shoulder. "You'll be arrested for interfering with a flight crew. That's a federal offense, son. You want to go to jail over a temper tantrum?" Desmond ignored him. He scrolled to a contact saved simply as Richard G. Personal. He pressed dial. He put the phone on speaker and held it up. The line rang once, twice. Lydia crossed her arms, rolling her eyes. "Who is he calling? His lawyer? Please." Harrington laughed. "Probably his mum." Then the ringing stopped, and a crisp, distinctly British voice filled the cabin. A voice that Captain Harrison knew very, very well. It was the voice that appeared on the mandatory company-wide briefing videos every month. "Desmond, you caught me just as I was leaving the office. Everything all right? You should be in the air by now." The color drained from Captain Harrison's face instantly. It was a visceral reaction, like a plug had been pulled. His jaw went slack. Lydia frowned, looking confused. She didn't recognize the voice immediately, but she saw the captain's reaction. Who is that?" Desmond smiled, his eyes locking with the captain's terrified gaze. "Hey, Richard," Desmond said into the phone, his voice smooth and clear. "I am on the plane, Flight 882. But we have a bit of a situation. Your captain here, a Mr. Harrison, and his lead flight attendant, Lydia. They seem to be under the impression that I'm not suitable for first class. In fact, they're threatening to have me arrested." There was a silence on the other end of the line, a cold, heavy silence that felt like it dropped the cabin temperature by 10 degrees. "Arrested?" Sir Richard Galloway, the owner of the airline, repeated. The warmth was gone from his voice, replaced by the steeliness of a man who owned fleets of jets. "Put Harrison on. Now." Desmond extended the phone toward the captain. "It's for you." The cabin of Flight 882 seemed to shrink. The gentle hum of the auxiliary power unit, usually a white noise that faded into the background, now sounded like a roaring turbine in the silence that had befallen first class. Captain Harrison stared at the smartphone in Desmond's hand as if it were a live grenade. He didn't want to take it. His instincts, honed by years of flying military cargo and commercial jets, told him that touching that phone was the point of no return. But the voice, he couldn't deny the voice. He had heard it at every company Christmas party, every shareholder briefing, every crisis management seminar. It was the voice of Sir Richard Galloway, a man who didn't just own the airline. He was a knight of the realm, a billionaire tycoon known for his ruthlessness with incompetence as much as his generosity with success. "Take it," Desmond said softly. His expression wasn't smug. It was something worse. It was disappointed. Harrison's hand trembled as he reached out. His fingers brushed against Desmond's rough calluses, the hands of a man who worked, unlike the soft, manicured hands of Arthur Harrington across the aisle. Harrison brought the phone to his ear. "This is Captain Harrison," he said. His voice, usually a booming baritone that commanded respect, came out as a strangled squeak. "Harrison?" Sir Richard's voice cut through the speaker, crisp and dangerously low. "Do you have any idea who you are currently threatening to arrest?" Harrison swallowed hard. His throat clicked audibly. "Sir, we have a passenger who was refusing to follow crew instructions. He was aggressive. We followed protocol regarding unruly." "Protocol?" Sir Richard laughed, a cold, sharp sound that made Harrison flinch. "Let me explain the protocol to you, Captain. The man sitting in seat 1A is Desmond Cole. Does that name ring a bell? It should. He is the founder of Cole Capital. As of 9 o'clock this morning, London time, Mr. Cole signed a convertible note that injected £400 million into our operating budget. He effectively owns the fuel in your wings, the lease on your aircraft, and quite frankly, the shirt on your back. Harrison felt the blood drain from his legs. He gripped the back of Desmond's seat to steady himself. He looked down at Desmond, who was calmly watching him, hands folded in his lap. This man in the hoodie, this man who looked like he'd spent the night sleeping in a terminal, he was the savior the company had been rumored to be seeking for months. I wasn't aware, Harrison stammered, sweat breaking out instantly across his forehead, soaking the band of his cap. The manifest. It didn't list VIP status. We thought— You thought what? Sir Richard snapped. You thought you could bully a paying passenger because you didn't like the look of him? I'm listening to you on speaker, Harrison. I heard you threaten him. I heard you threaten to call the police on the man who just saved 20,000 jobs, including yours. It was a misunderstanding, Sir Richard. A terrible misunderstanding. Mr. Harrington, another passenger, claimed— I don't care what anyone claimed, Richard interrupted. Here is your new protocol. You will apologize to Mr. Cole. You will offer him whatever he requires. And then you will fly that plane to New York safely. If Mr. Cole calls me back with even a whisper of a complaint about your conduct, or the conduct of your crew, you won't just be fired. I will ensure you never sit in a cockpit again. I will strip your pension and sue you for breach of conduct so fast your head will spin. Do I make myself clear? Yes, sir. Crystal clear, sir, Harrison whispered. Put Desmond back on. Harrison lowered the phone slowly, his face ashen. He handed the device back to Desmond with two hands, bowing his head slightly as he did so. It was a gesture of total submission. Desmond took the phone. I'm here, Richard. Des, I am mortified, Richard said, his tone softening instantly. I can have the airport manager pull them off the plane right now. Say the word. We'll get a reserve crew. It'll take an hour, but I'll do it. Desmond looked at Harrison, who was now trembling visibly. He looked at Lydia, whose smug smile had vanished, replaced by a look of dawning horror. She didn't know exactly what was said, but she saw the captain's fear. No, Desmond said, his eyes locked on Lydia. We're already late. I have meetings in New York. Let's go. But Richard, I want a full report filed on this incident, and I want to speak to the Chief of Staff when I land. Done. Have a safe flight, my friend. The call ended. Desmond slipped the phone back into his pocket. The silence in the cabin was heavy, suffocating. Harrison cleared his throat. He looked like a man marching to the gallows. Mr. Cole, he began, his voice shaking. I offer my sincerest apologies. I was misinformed about the situation. I acted presumptuously. You acted with prejudice, Desmond corrected him calmly. You didn't verify anything. You took one look at me and made a decision. Yes, sir. You are right, Harrison admitted, staring at his shoes. It won't happen again. No, Desmond said. It won't. Harrison turned to Lydia. His eyes were wild, desperate to shift some of the blame, or at least mitigate the damage. Lydia, get Mr. Cole a glass of champagne, the vintage bottle, immediately. Lydia froze. But, Captain, Mr. Harrington, I don't give a damn about Mr. Harrington, Harrison roared, causing the entire cabin to jump. Get Mr. Cole whatever he wants. Now. He spun around and marched back into the cockpit, slamming the door so hard the exit sign rattled. Lydia stood there, pale and shaking. She looked at Desmond. For the first time, she really looked at him. She saw the intelligence in his eyes, the authority he held without saying a word. She realized with a sinking pit in her stomach that she had just tried to kick the boss off the bus. Mr. Cole, she stammered, her voice trembling. I am so sorry. I didn't know. You didn't know I was rich? Desmond asked, raising an eyebrow. Is that what you mean? If I was just a regular guy in a hoodie, would it have been okay to treat me like trash? Lydia opened her mouth, but no words came out. She flushed a deep, blotchy red. Water, Desmond said, turning back to his laptop. Just water. And tell Todd to bring it. I don't want you serving me. Lydia flinched as if he'd slapped her. Yes, sir. She retreated to the galley, tears welling in her eyes. From across the aisle, Arthur Harrington watched the entire exchange, his mouth agape. The champagne glass in his hand was tilted dangerously, threatening to spill. He looked from the closed cockpit door to Desmond, his brain struggling to compute the sudden shift in reality. The thug was important? More important than him? Harrington's ego, inflated by decades of bullying subordinates and waiter staff, couldn't handle it. He slammed his glass down on the tray table. Hey! Harrington barked. Desmond didn't look up. I'm talking to you, Harrington shouted. Desmond continued to type. Don't ignore me. Harrington unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up. Who the hell do you think you are? Calling the CEO? What? Are you his diversity hire nephew or something? You think that scares me? The tension, which had just begun to dissipate, snapped back into place like a rubber band. The aircraft finally began to push back from the gate, the engines whining as they spooled up. But inside first class, a different kind of turbulence was brewing. Desmond finally stopped typing. He slowly rotated his head to look at Arthur Harrington. Harrington was standing in the aisle now, his face a mask of wealthy indignation. He was a man used to getting his way, a man who believed that money was the ultimate shield against consequences. He didn't realize that in the ocean of wealth, he was a barracuda swimming next to a killer whale. Mr. Harrington, Desmond said, his voice level. Please sit down. The aircraft is moving. I'm not sitting until I get an explanation, Harrington spat. I come on this airline. I pay $10,000 for a ticket, and I have to watch the captain bow and scrape to a nobody. It's pathetic. I'm going to write a letter. I'm going to have you investigated for fraud. I know people. I'm sure you do, Desmond said. You're Arthur Harrington, CEO of Harrington Developments, currently trying to break ground on the Azure Tower project in downtown Miami. Right? Harrington blinked, taken aback. How do you know that? It's my job to know risky investments, Desmond said. And the Azure Tower, that's a very risky investment. High leverage, shaky zoning permits, and a class action lawsuit pending from the local environmental group. It's a house of cards, Arthur. Harrington's face turned a darker shade of crimson. That is confidential business information. Who are you? Who do you work for? Goldman? J.P. Morgan? I work for myself, Desmond said. Cole Capital. Harrington froze. The name clearly meant something to him. His eyes widened slightly. Cole Capital was known in the industry as the vulture killer. They didn't just invest, they dismantled bad leadership. But Harrington, being a narcissist, quickly dismissed the threat. Cole Capital? Harrington sneered, though his voice wavered slightly. Yeah, I've heard of you. Boutique firm, small time. You think you can intimidate me with numbers? I build skylines, boy. You just push paper. Todd, the young flight attendant, appeared from the galley, looking terrified. Mr. Harrington, please, we are taxiing. You must sit down. Get away from me. Harrington shoved Todd's arm away. I'm finishing this. He leaned over Desmond's suite, invading his personal space again. "Let me tell you something. When we land in New York, I'm going to make sure you're detained. I'm a personal friend of the police commissioner. You disrupted this flight. You threatened the crew. The captain might be spineless, but I'm not. I'm going to ruin your day." Desmond sighed. He looked at Todd. "Todd, is the cockpit door locked?" "Yes, sir," Todd squeaked. "Good. Because Mr. Harrington is threatening a passenger and physically assaulting the crew." "I didn't assault anyone," Harrington yelled. "You shoved him," Desmond pointed out. "There are cameras in this cabin, Arthur, and I have 3 witnesses. The lady in 2A?" Desmond turned to the elderly woman. She had been shrinking into her seat, but now, seeing the calm strength in Desmond, she sat up straighter. "I saw it," she said, her voice shaky but clear. "He pushed the young man, and he has been shouting slurs since he boarded." Harrington whipped around to glare at her. "Shut up, you old bat!" "That's enough." Desmond stood up. He didn't shout. He didn't posture. He simply unfolded his frame, rising to his full 6'3" height. He stepped into the aisle, placing himself between Harrington and the elderly woman, and between Harrington and Todd. "Sit down, Arthur," Desmond commanded. The authority in his voice was absolute. It wasn't the authority of a captain or a police officer. It was the authority of a man who controlled the board. Harrington looked at Desmond, then at the window where the runway lights were blurring past. The plane was picking up speed for takeoff, but they weren't on the runway yet. They were still on the taxiway. Suddenly the plane braked hard. The momentum threw Harrington forward, and he stumbled, barely catching himself on Desmond's seat. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Harrison's voice came over the intercom, sounding defeated and exhausted. "This is the captain. We have a situation in the cabin that requires us to return to the gate. I apologize for the inconvenience." "What?" Harrington screamed. "No, I have a meeting at 4. He turned on Desmond. "This is your fault. You did this." Desmond checked his watch. "Actually, I think you'll find this is your fault. The captain can't take off with a passenger standing in the aisle making threats. It's a safety violation." The plane made a sharp U-turn. The engines, powered down from their taxi, thrust to a low idle. Lydia came rushing out of the galley, looking like she was about to be sick. "Mr. Harrington, you have to sit down. We are going back to the gate." "I demand to speak to the captain," Harrington roared. "You're going to speak to someone, all right," Desmond said quietly. He picked up his phone again. The signal was strong now that they were back near the terminal. He tapped on his email app. He found a specific thread titled Azure Tower Financing, Syndication Review. He hit Reply All. He typed a short message. Effective immediately, Cole Capital is withdrawing its underwriting support for the Azure Tower project due to serious concerns regarding the character and stability of the lead developer, Arthur Harrington. We advise all partner banks to review the conduct clauses in their loan agreements. Full incident report to follow regarding Harrington's assault of airline staff today. Desmond hit send. He looked at Harrington, who was now being verbally wrangled by both Lydia and Todd. "Check your email, Arthur," Desmond said. "What?" Harrington snapped, panting heavily. "Check your email. I assume you get notifications on that fancy watch of yours." Harrington looked down at his wrist. His smartwatch buzzed. Then it buzzed again, and again. A flurry of notifications. He tapped the screen. His face went from red to a ghostly white in the span of 3 seconds. He looked up at Desmond, his eyes wide with genuine terror. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the sheer panic of a man watching his empire crumble in real time. You can't do that," Harrington whispered. "That funding, that's the whole project. If you pull out, the construction loans default. I'll be bankrupt." You should have thought about that before you put your feet on my seat, Desmond said coldly. And before you called me boy. The plane shuddered to a halt. The fasten seatbelt sign dinged off. The main cabin door opened. But it wasn't the jet bridge operator. Two large men in dark suits stepped onto the plane, followed by a woman in a sharp navy blazer. She wore a badge on a lanyard around her neck. Federal Air Marshal. Lydia let out a small gasp. She thought they were coming for her. The marshal scanned the room. We have a report of a passenger interfering with a flight crew and assaulting a flight attendant. Which one is Arthur Harrington? Desmond pointed a long finger at the man in the bespoke suit. That would be him. Harrington backed away, shaking his head. No, look, this is a mistake. That man, he pointed at Desmond. He's the one. He started it. He's... Mr. Harrington, the marshal said, stepping forward and taking out a pair of zip ties. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back. You can't arrest me. I'm Arthur Harrington. Do you know who I am? Yes, the marshal said dryly. You're the man who just grounded a transatlantic flight. Federal charges, sir. Now turn around. As they handcuffed Harrington and began to drag him off the plane, kicking and screaming about lawsuits and his lawyer, Desmond sat back down. He picked up his water, which Todd had left for him. He took a sip. Lydia was standing by the galley curtain. She looked like a ghost. She watched Harrington get hauled away, and she knew, with terrifying certainty, that she was next. Not for arrest, perhaps, but her reckoning was coming. She walked over to Desmond, her legs trembling. Mr. Cole, she whispered, please, I have a daughter. I need this job. Desmond looked at her. He didn't see the haughty woman who had blocked his path earlier. He saw a terrified person who had made a series of terrible choices based on prejudice. You have a daughter? Desmond asked. Yes. She's 6. Does she know that her mother judges people by the color of their skin and the price of their clothes? Lydia put her hand over her mouth to stifle a sob. No, I don't know why I was so. You were comfortable, Desmond said. You were comfortable in your bias because you thought I was powerless. That is what scares me, Lydia. Not that you made a mistake, but that you enjoyed it. The cockpit door opened again. Captain Harrison stepped out. He looked at the empty seat where Harrington had been, then at Desmond. We will be refueling and departing in 45 minutes, Mr. Cole, Harrison said, his voice hollow. If you wish to deplane, we understand. I'm staying, Desmond said, but I want a new flight attendant for this cabin. Lydia can work economy, in the back row, next to the toilets. Lydia looked up, shock washing over her face. It was a demotion, a humiliation, but it wasn't a firing. And Harrison? Desmond added. Yes, sir. When we land, I expect you to personally apologize to every single passenger in economy for this delay. You will tell them it was a management issue. You will not blame it on cargo weight. You will own it. Harrison swallowed. Yes, sir. Go, Desmond said. Lydia fled to the back of the plane. Harrison returned to the cockpit. Desmond closed his eyes. The cabin was quiet again. The old woman in 2A leaned across the aisle. Young man, she whispered. Desmond opened one eye. Yes, ma'am. That was the most dramatic thing I have ever seen, she said, a twinkle in her eye. And I was in Paris during the riots of 68. Desmond smiled, a genuine tired smile. I just wanted a nap, ma'am. Well, she raised her glass. I think you earned it. But the drama wasn't quite over. As the plane prepared for its second attempt at departure, Desmond's phone buzzed again. It was a text from Richard Galloway. Harrington is in custody. But Des, check the news. Someone live-streamed the arrest from business class. You're trending, Desmond groaned. He didn't want fame. He wanted justice. But in the modern world, sometimes you couldn't have one without the other. And he had a feeling that when he landed in New York, the real storm would begin. The fasten seatbelt sign finally turned off as Flight 882 reached its cruising altitude of 36,000 feet. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin, however, remained as brittle as thin ice. The air was thick with a strange mixture of relief and terrifying anticipation. Desmond Cole sat in seat 1A, the seat he had fought for, the seat that had nearly cost him his dignity. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt exhausted. He rubbed his temples, staring out the window at the endless blue horizon above the clouds. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a dull ache in his chest, the familiar ache of a man who is tired of proving he belongs in the rooms he owns. "Mr. Cole?" Desmond turned. It was Todd, the young flight attendant. He was balancing a silver tray with a level of concentration that suggested he was defusing a bomb. On the tray was a bottle of vintage sparkling water, a crystal glass with a slice of lime, and a small porcelain bowl of warm nuts. "The captain sent this," Todd said, his voice barely a whisper. He wanted to know if the temperature in the cabin is to your liking." Desmond looked at the tray, then at Todd. "Todd, you don't have to tiptoe around me. You were the only one who tried to do the right thing." Todd's shoulders slumped in relief. "I tried to tell her, sir. Lydia, she can be very set in her ways. And Captain Harrison, he usually just listens to whoever shouts the loudest." "That's a dangerous quality in a pilot," Desmond noted dryly. "How is Lydia doing back there?" Todd hesitated, looking toward the curtain that separated the premium cabins from economy. "It's not going well for her. We are fully booked in economy. She's sitting in the jump seat by the rear lavatories. The passengers back there. Well, word spreads fast. Someone airdropped the video of the arrest to half the plane before we took off. They know why she's back there." Desmond nodded slowly. "Karma is rarely subtle, Todd. Thank you for the water." As Todd retreated, Desmond opened his laptop again. He connected to the in-flight Wi-Fi, which was usually spotty, but today seemed to be working at lightning speed, probably because Captain Harrison had ordered the engineers to prioritize the bandwidth for seat 1A. Desmond navigated to the news. He didn't have to search far. "Banking tycoon racially profiled on Flight 882. Airline stock dips 4%. Harrington Developments. CEO arrested for assaulting Air Marshal." "Who is Desmond Cole, the silent billionaire in the hoodie?" Desmond clicked on a video link. It was a shaky recording taken from across the aisle in business class, likely by a teenager peeking through the gap in the seats. It showed everything. Harrison threatening to arrest him, Desmond calmly making the call, the look on Harrison's face when Sir Richard Galloway spoke, and finally, Harrington's meltdown. The views were climbing by the second. 1.2 million. 1.5 million. Desmond's phone pinged with an email. It was from his chief legal officer, Sarah Jenkins. Subject: the Harrington fallout. "Des, I just saw the footage. Are you okay? We are already preparing a statement. Also regarding the Azure Tower project. The withdrawal of our funding has triggered a liquidity crisis for Harrington. His creditors are calling us. They are panicking. Do you want to offer a lifeline or let it burn? Essa." Desmond typed a one-word reply. "Burn." He closed the tab. He wasn't being cruel, he was being consistent. Men like Harrington built their fortunes on intimidation and shortcuts. If the foundation was rotten, the tower deserved to fall. He's going to lose everything, isn't he? Desmond looked to his right. The elderly woman in seat 2A, the one who had witnessed the assault, was watching him. She had a glass of red wine in her hand, and a look of shrewd intelligence on her face. "Harrington?" Desmond asked. "Yes." "I know the type," she said, adjusting her pearl necklace. "I used to be a judge. Superior Court of New Jersey. Evelyn Vance. I've seen 1,000 Arthur Harringtons. They think the law is a spider web. Catches the weak, but the big bugs break right through. They're always shocked when they finally get stuck." Desmond smiled, extending a hand across the aisle. "Desmond Cole, it's an honor, Judge Vance." "The honor is mine," she said, shaking his hand firmly. "You handled that with remarkable restraint. Most men would have thrown a punch." "I learned a long time ago that punches don't change anything," Desmond said. "Money changes things. Policy changes things. If I hit him, I'm just an angry black man in the eyes of the jury. If I bankrupt him, I'm a force of nature." Evelyn chuckled, taking a sip of her wine. "Ruthless, I like it. But tell me, Mr. Cole, what are you going to do about the captain? And that woman?" Desmond glanced toward the cockpit door. "That depends on what happens when we land." "You know," Evelyn mused, "Harrison is terrified. I can see it in the way he flies. The ascent was too steep. He's trying to get you to New York faster, as if arriving early will make you forget." "It won't," Desmond said. Suddenly, the curtain to the galley whipped open. Captain Harrison emerged. He had taken off his jacket, and his tie was loosened, but he looked like he was suffocating. He held a large, leather-bound folio. "Mr. Cole," Harrison said, his voice cracking. He didn't dare step fully into the suite. He hovered in the aisle like a servant, waiting for permission to speak. "Captain," Desmond acknowledged him without looking up from his screen. I brought the flight logs," Harrison stammered, "and the crew manifest. And I wrote a formal letter of apology. I wanted you to have it before we land. I also radioed ahead to operations. I've arranged for a private car to take you to your hotel. On my personal expense account." Desmond finally looked up. He took the leather folio. He didn't open it. He just set it on the empty seat next to him. "You think a car ride fixes this, Captain?" "No, sir. I know it doesn't," Harrison said, sweat beading on his upper lip. "But I need you to understand. I have 20 years with this airline. I have a mortgage, 2 kids in college. I made a mistake, a horrible judgment call. But I am begging you, don't take my wings." Desmond looked at Harrison. He saw the desperation. It was real. But he also remembered the arrogance in Harrison's voice an hour ago. "Sit down, shut your mouth, and not say a single word. You were willing to let the police take me off this plane in handcuffs," Desmond said softly. "You were willing to let me have a criminal record. Do you know what happens to a black man in the system, Captain? Even a wealthy one? You were ready to ruin my life because it was convenient for you." Harrison looked down, shame coloring his face purple. I didn't think." "Exactly," Desmond said. "You didn't think. You reacted based on bias. And that is why you are dangerous in that cockpit. What happens when you have to make a split-second decision about a mechanical failure? Do you rely on bias, then? Do you assume the warning light is lying?" "That's different," Harrison argued weakly. "Is it?" Desmond leaned forward. "Judge Vance here tells me your ascent was steep. You're flying emotionally, Captain. You are compromised." Harrison looked at Evelyn Vance, his eyes widening. He hadn't realized a judge was sitting 5 feet away. "Go back to the cockpit, Harrison," Desmond said, dismissing him. "Fly the plane. We'll talk about your wings when we're on the ground." Harrison turned and walked away, his steps heavy. He looked like a man walking toward his own execution. As the hours passed, the cabin remained quiet, but it was the silence of a courtroom before the verdict. Desmond didn't sleep. He spent the entire 7-hour flight drafting a new corporate governance document for the airline. He outlined new training protocols, zero-tolerance policies for discrimination, and a new oversight committee for customer complaints. He wasn't just complaining to the manager. He was rewriting the rule book. Around hour 5, a small commotion occurred in the back. Todd came rushing forward to the galley, looking distressed. He grabbed a first aid kit. "What is it?" Desmond asked. "It's Lydia," Todd whispered. "She's having a panic attack. She hyperventilated and passed out in the rear galley." Desmond paused. He felt a flicker of sympathy, human to human, but it was brief. "Is there a doctor on board?" "Yes, a pediatrician in 4C. He's with her now." "Good," Desmond said. "Make sure she gets water, but keep her in the back." You don't want to check on her?" Todd asked. "No," Desmond said, turning back to his work. "She needs to understand that her actions have consequences. If she was in charge, I'd be in a holding cell right now. She's just sitting in a jump seat. She'll survive." It was a harsh lesson, but Desmond knew that mercy without justice was just weakness. And today, he couldn't afford to be weak. The wheels of Flight 882 touched down at JFK, but the plane didn't head to a normal terminal. Instead, it taxied to a secluded hangar reserved for high-security arrivals. The silence in the first-class cabin was suffocating. When the doors finally opened, Marcus Thorne, the airline's regional director, rushed on board, sweating and apologetic. He offered Desmond a suite at the Mandarin Oriental, but Desmond walked right past him. He had business to finish on the tarmac. Waiting outside were 3 black SUVs and a police cruiser. Arthur Harrington, disheveled and frantic, was already arguing with a federal air marshal. When he saw Desmond descending the stairs, Harrington lunged forward, desperate. "I'm suing you!" Harrington screamed, his face purple. "I'll own you for this. You can't treat me like a criminal." Desmond calmly signaled his lawyer, Sarah, who handed a tablet to Harrington. On the screen was a breaking Bloomberg headline: "Azure Tower project collapses as coal capital withdraws funding." "I didn't just call the airline owner, Arthur," Desmond said, his voice cutting through the wind. "I pulled your financing. Your creditors have already been notified. You aren't just under arrest, you are bankrupt." Harrington's legs gave out. He slumped against the police car, staring at Desmond in horror as the officers handcuffed him for the assault on the air marshal. The arrogance finally evaporated, leaving only a broken man. Desmond then turned to the crew. Captain Harrison stood with his head bowed, unable to meet Desmond's eyes. "You judged me on sight," Desmond stated. "You have 2 choices, Captain. Resign today and keep your pension, or I sue you personally for civil rights violations." "I'll resign," Harrison whispered, his 30-year career ending in shame on the tarmac. Finally, Desmond looked at Lydia. She was shaking violently, tears streaming down her face. "Please, Mr. Cole," she begged. "I have a daughter. I need this job." Desmond paused. He could crush her, but he chose a harder path. "I won't fire you," he said. Lydia sobbed in relief. "But you will never work first class again. You start at the bottom, probationary routes, economy only, and mandatory bias training. 1 complaint, and you're gone." "Thank you," she whispered, accepting the mercy she didn't deserve. Desmond hoisted his duffel bag, looking at the wreckage of egos he left behind. "Let this be a lesson," he told the stunned executives. "Never judge a passenger by his hoodie. You never know who owns the plane." He climbed into the waiting SUV, finally closing his eyes as the car pulled away. Justice had been served. 6 months later, the fallout from Flight 882 was still rippling through the industry. The footage of Arthur Harrington's arrest had not only gone viral, it had become a case study in business schools regarding reputation management. The Azure Tower project in Miami was never built. Today, the lot sits as an empty, weed-filled patch of dirt, a monument to hubris. Arthur Harrington was forced to liquidate his assets to cover the breach of contract lawsuits. He avoided prison time by taking a plea deal for the assault charge, but his reputation was incinerated. Last heard, he was living in a small apartment in Tampa, managing a rental car branch under a different name. The man who once demanded vintage champagne now spent his days arguing with tourists about gas mileage. As for the crew, the airline kept its promise. Captain Harrison retired quietly to a small coastal town. Friends say he refuses to fly, even as a passenger. The shame of that day grounded him permanently. Lydia is still flying, but her life is very different. She works the red-eye regional routes now, short hops between Cleveland and Detroit at 2 in the morning. There is no champagne, no first class, and no power trips. Passengers report that she is quiet, efficient, and incredibly polite to everyone, regardless of what they are wearing. She learned the hardest lesson of all. Dignity isn't a uniform. It's how you treat people when you think no one is watching. And Desmond Cole? He didn't stop flying commercial. He still wears his hoodie, and he still carries his own duffel bag. But now, when he walks into a terminal, the staff doesn't see a thug. They see the man who changed the rules. He used his position at Cole Capital to launch a scholarship fund for underprivileged pilots, ensuring that the next generation of captains looks a lot more like the world they fly over. He proved that true power doesn't need to shout to be heard. That is the incredible story of Desmond Cole and the flight that changed everything. It's a powerful reminder that in this life, you can't judge a book by its cover. And you definitely shouldn't judge a passenger by their hoodie. Arthur Harrington and the crew of Flight 882 thought they were dealing with a nobody, but they ended up crashing their own careers against a wall of instant karma. It just goes to show that arrogance is the most expensive luxury of all, and sooner or later, everyone gets the bill. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Have you ever been judged based on your appearance? Tell us your story in the comments below. We love reading them. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Share this video with a friend who needs a reminder to be kind. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.